Hello and welcome back to Scale Modelling Cafe, and welcome to part 2 of the Eduard 109 G14 8S project in 1/48 scale. In this episode I'll be doing the cockpit, doing all the detailing and the painting and the weathering, and it all starts with the cockpit floor, removing the moulded in detail, ready for the aftermarket detail stuff. More of that to come later. So the bulk of it was removed with a very sharp scalpel blade and then just levelled off with this fine metal file because I wanted to keep it absolutely flat and level and no rounded edges. Now on with the construction. So it all starts on the left hand side with the rather large elevator trim wheel. And that goes into that hole. That needed to be opened out just a little bit and just it's set in place with a little bit of cement. And what I tend to do with these things is back it up with a bit of cement on the bottom and some photo etch which came from the space set. As I've said on the intro, I think it's really cost effective to go down the Overtrees route, and then something like the space set where you get some of the most important details in photo etch, as well as the 3D printed decal instruments, which you'll see later on. So that sort of chain thing gets sort of sandwiched in between the two wheels, and then just forward of that is the metal sort of support, which is folded up. What's also folded up are the rudder pedals, and these can be incredibly fiddly actually, especially at the very top. They're very thin, so you do have to be careful. I've damaged more than one before in my time. Oops, that's the breech cover of the nose mounted cannon just going in place. And now to remove more detail. So this is on the right hand fuselage half. Just removing the detail with that metal file. Again, just to keep everything completely flat. Now the bits above, I went in with the scalpel blade and then went in with the file. What I should have done is just polished up some of the score marks that the file left, which was a bit of a shame. This is the oxygen controls for the regulator and the dials, so that's photo etch. That does replace a plastic part. And that just gets bent and glued into place. So here's the oxygen regulator, and a little bit more detailing here. So it was drilled out and then some fine lead wire, I think that's 0.2, was glued into place. Side panels going in. And then a little bit more detail. So this is a colour printed little lever thing, but I ended up repainting it anyway. And talking of painting, so it all starts with a primer coat of gloss black. This is Mr. Surfacer decanted from a spray can. And by using the black primer, that's going to help create some decent shadows and things. Some of the other bits were put onto this wooden spoon with a bit of double-sided tape. It's going to make it easier. And now with the RLM 66. So apologies for the close-up of the colour cut there. It's a new camera. I'm still playing around with some of the angles. This is MRP, which is my go-to paint of choice. And you can just use that black undercoat just to help with some shadows. I'm not marbling or anything like that. But by a thinner coat in the nooks and crannies, you can create some nice sort of shadow effects. Doesn't really show up all that well here because the lighting is actually quite strong, but it is there. but we're going to go and enhance that later anyway. And same for the main sort of cockpit tub. Now the bit to the right of that is the cockpit bulkhead. I left that black. And the bit to the left is the baggage bay behind the pilot's head, which is actually the wrong one for this version. So I painted it and weathered it, and then had to go and paint and weather the other one, the correct one, the one with the bulged bit. Now for some highlights. We've sort of done the lowlights with the shadow effect with the undercoat. I'm not kind of pre-shading. I'm not really a fan of pre-shading at all. But a little bit of post-shading here. So a little bit of white. Again, MRP white. Just put in the colour cup. And then just cloudy effect on the sort of in the middle of the panels and things. Again, further enhancing that depth effect. Same deal going on with the other cockpit parts. Again, concentrating on the kind of exposed corners, if you like. The middle of the panels. Not much point doing that middle bit there, but it's good practice. Getting the flow of the airbrush right and the distance and everything. That's going to be covered up with the back plate, which is just to the right of the forward bulkhead. And all this is designed to create sort of depth and increasing the highlights. Now it is obviously lighter than RLM 66, but we don't want it too dark in there. We do actually want to see something, and we're going to put a wash on in a sec, so it's all going to bring that sort of highlights down. Some detail painting. The oxygen regulator, that was picked out in blue, and this pipe is not actually blue. This goes into the oxygen regulator as well. This goes into this is actually black, looking at some colour photographs I found of sort of unrestored aeroplanes. Out with the yellow, these sort of knobs, whatever they were down here, these twiddly things, they were yellow. And you can see I've already painted the white of the trim wheel markings and then went in there with red. And they were slightly touched up as well, where I got a bit crazy with the red. Chipping, this is a very fine makeup sponge, which I find is really good for those really fine, sort of almost worn rather than chipped effect. And that's just using some ammo steel colour, which is my go-to. And it's just dabbed on in areas of high wear. Nothing too mad. Just a little bit at the back there where the seat harness would sort of wear away and chip the paint, and obviously the footrests. And then I went in with a brush just to sort of increase the effect in the high wear areas. Obviously the rudder pedals, they would have taken a beating. While I was there, I just picked up the buckle on the leather strap that holds the cover in place. And then just sort of touched in around the edges where the sponge couldn't quite get to, just on the footrests. So a mixture of chipping techniques. And yeah, you just kind of pick the tool and the effect that is going to get the sort of final finish that you want, really. Now for the oil wash, this is just the oil brusher. Black, just thinned down with some enamel thinners. And the MRP paint is it's really quite shiny and glossy, so no gloss varnish required, and you can just go in and touch it in, and capillary action will just wick it along all that sort of nicely recessed detail. And you can see how effective that is on the footrests. I just kind of brush it over the top. And just touching it on these sides here, picking up that detail. and then again either side of the strap, and yeah, just sort of going around touching it where it's required really. And then once it's dry, about half an hour or so, something like that, we can go in and start cleaning up the excess and blending it all in. So you can see to the right hand side it's a bit streaky. I thought I'd have a go at that. Not that you're going to see that because the instrument panel really is going to cover that all up. But you can see there how much depth we've got with the sort of shadow effects with the black undercoat, and then the post shading with the lighter colour, and then finally going in with the wash, just streaking some down a little bit. It's not just the brush that's used to get rid of the excess. A cotton bud is a really good tool, and especially with oils, it really does mean you can get in there and do some really nice blending effects. Enamel washes, you tend to have to use this this brush technique, and it can be a little bit harsher, but the oils, you've got more working time, and I do find that they do blend better. Right, so here is the Eduard 3D printed decal. So you don't have to soak them like a traditional decal. I just dab on a little bit of, tiny bit of water on the back. Just using the cut down pipette there. And I've done this in real time so you can see how quick it is. That's what, just a few seconds. And then you can go in and just start peeling it off. So this is the oxygen regulator. You see a little bit of brush painting there as well. And then some of them I use super glue, some of them I use the Eduard Me Ultra Glue, which is like an acrylic resin. It's water based. And we just start working our way around. These little control boxes were done as well. You can see they've been picked out in black first. Okay, the instrument panel, here's the thinned down ultra glue. Mine's getting on a bit actually, it's quite thick, so I did thin it down with water. And then this is the Red Fox Studios instrument panel, which I do actually prefer because it's acrylic resin, it's nice and solid. Some more of the space photo etch. This is the colour stuff going on now. And I did add a little bit of extra wiring at the bottom as well. So the photo etch sort of pre-painted harness, that was just simply super glued in place. Again, that comes in the space set. Layered up with the lap straps first, and then these just sort of drape over the top. They do look a little bit harsh, so after everything had a matte varnish, I did go in and just sort of give a very subtle brown filter just to sort of dial back the contrast a bit really. And now for some pigments. Not too much, just a sort of light dusting. This really adds that little bit of wear and tear. It's probably a bit of overkill if I'm honest. But you know, these aeroplanes were operated in the field from grass strips. Once it was set in place with enamel thinner, I just went in with a cotton bud and just removed it from the high spots, just to leave it in all the recesses and the nooks and crannies. And not forgetting the sides as well of the cockpit. So in with the dust first, and then a bit of earth. And the name of the game here is to be subtle. You just want a slight discoloration. Again, it's probably not realistic, but it just adds to the overall sort of worn, faded, dirty effect. So once it's been blended with a dry brush, we go in with a bit of thinner. And this is going to do a little bit more blending and also fix it in place. You could use pigment fixer, but I prefer white spirit in the cockpit. And it's just blasted with a hairdryer and you can instantly see the effect and do a little bit more blending if required. Right, this was a bit of a fiddle then. So I drilled some holes in the bulkhead, and then in order to fix the cockpit in place, it really was trying to, you know, it's like sewing, trying to put these quite fragile actually lead wires through the little hole that I drilled, but I did get there in the end. You can see the yellow pipe there, that was clear as molded in the kit. So the clear portion was masked and then it was undercoated in white, then sprayed yellow. The black fixings were picked out with a brush, and then I just used some ammo, self-adhesive, aluminium foil just for the metal clips. Once all in place, we can just tackle him with a bit of glue. Now, I don't recommend gluing the cockpit sides because you do want a little bit of play in there. You don't want to pull them in too tight, otherwise you're going to get gaps at the wing root. So I just glued it at the back, and the bulkhead there I just glued on one side so I could spread the fuselage if I needed to. There are tiny little nubbins that stick out the clear part and some locator holes. So a little bit of glue in there, and then that was just held in place. You'll see some of the silver strapping bits kept on coming away actually because they're so thin on the foil. There we go. So thin on the foil, there's not much adhesive on there at all. So I eventually went back in and just with a tiny bit of super glue just stuck those down. On the other side, there's two sort of pins molded into the instrument panel. They just fit in the recess. Very carefully putting that in, and then just adding the bit of glue on the back. And then what I'll do is I'll normally wait overnight before putting the fuselage halves together. So there we go. That's the cockpit all done. A few sort of high-res pictures there just before it all went together. And it's a nicely detailed cockpit in its own right, but those little extras, I think, a little bit of wiring and certainly the extra detail really does lift it. Makes it a lot more busy. And that's it. That is the end of part 2. So in the next part, we do a bit of rescribing along the seams. That was a bit tricky. We remove some hairline gaps with a bit of Mr. Surfacer and a cotton bud. And we take a bit of a belt and braces approach on some of the seams. Not that it was really required. And at the end of the next episode, we'll get to this stage, ready for painting. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.